So a lot of people in the audience are probably developers, and you might find this presentation a little bit boring. But some of you might be people who manage developers or groups of developers or who are trying as an organization or as an enterprise to launch an API strategy. And you're trying to figure out how to do that and with what tools you need to do that. So I'm going to try and perhaps broaden the scope of APIs and what an API means to a business. And to do that, I'm going to talk a little bit about the API lifecycle as we see it. And I'm also going to talk about a little bit about an API or an API management reference architecture. In my world, I deal with companies that are typically very large. I deal with financial companies, I deal with retail companies, I deal with sometimes older and stodgier companies that are trying to figure out what they're going to do with mobile devices, what they're going to do with APIs, how they're going to launch APIs, and how they're going to manage that strategy. And for them, it's not a simple matter of setting up a Node.js server and launching an API. They actually have to really think about it and consider it. And it might not be something necessarily that they are familiar with. So hopefully my presentation will help you understand potentially the problems that they see. And if you're one of those companies, will help you potentially broaden your ideas around an API and help you fit that API within your business. So there's the soup and there's the nut. But essentially what happens is when companies are looking at APIs and trying to figure out what they're going to do with APIs, they put together an API lifecycle. And hopefully it looks something like this. They need to start with planning. It's no good putting out an API that you haven't thought about. Then they sit down and they build it for a while, maybe 6 months, maybe 9 months, I don't know, maybe 2 days. It's all varying, it's all different, depending on who you talk to and what they're trying to accomplish, what they're trying to understand. Then they have to run and actually operate that API, or that particular version of the API. Then they have to think about how they're going to share this API with the rest of the world. And there's a lot of different ways and a lot of different audiences for that particular API. And then at the end of the day, they need to analyze whether or not they've been successful. So they need to pick up their reports, and they need to take a quantifiable, honest look at what their API practice is doing and what value their APIs are bringing to the business, and figure out what the next version of that API is going to look like. And this life cycle is not short. It's not as agile as people might hope it to be because it involves people from business. It involves people from IT. It involves the developer community. And this plan, this life cycle might be multiple months long. And that's quite a challenge when you're looking at multiple APIs for large businesses. If I think about a bank, for example, that's putting out an API strategy, they're not going to have one API. They're going to have 100 APIs. And when you have 100 APIs and all of them are going through their life cycle, all of them are changing, all of them are there to meet the needs of maybe a B2B community, it's a very, very, very different approach. It's a very, very different go-to-market approach than perhaps my colleague that was on before, where their API is very singularly focused to delivering their product to a group of developers. Most people we deal with have, I know one company has 100 APIs. And these APIs are used for all sorts of things. They're replacing legacy B2B kind of communication within the enterprise. APIs are being built to manage a BYOD strategy, a business-to-employee strategy within the organization, host multiple applications for back-end services, for customer services, for ERP, whatever the case might be. These are complex organizations with complex problems. So let's start with planning. So the first and most important thing is the API needs to be a product. I think that's the one distinct difference between APIs and SOA. You can see I'm from SOA software. I know what SOA is all about. The biggest difference between APIs and SOA is that SOA was focused on machine-to-machine integration and APIs are not. APIs are focused on the human being at the other side of the channel. They focused on changing the center of gravity. You're building an API as a product. You're going to launch it into the marketplace, whether it's a free and open marketplace or something that's just between you and your partners. But the goal here is that you think about an API and you launch that API, and hopefully you don't have to change that API a lot over time. It's something that you go out, you market, you package, you productize, and you launch to your partners as if it was a motor car or a new consulting service or whatever the case might be. So when you plan, you need to plan for productizing that API. You need to determine the business purpose for that API. You need to understand the cost and benefit outcomes for the business as well as for the intended users. You need to agree on the priority and schedule for the delivery of that API. And you need to structure your entire business to support that API. There's no point in putting out an API and when the first developer starts using it and he sends that first email to tell you how awful it is, it's crickets out there. You need to structure your business around supporting what's ultimately a new channel for that business or for your business. Then you need to build that API. So once you've figured out what you're going to build and when you're going to build it and who's going to help you build it and all the monetary problems associated with that, you then need to go and build it. And you really need to build it from the outside in. That's the terminology I like to use with our customers. And what that means is that you really need to build it with that customer in mind. What are they going to be using it for? What's the channel? You need to understand and articulate the requirements. You need to make sure that there's agreement between different people. You need to separate functional and non-functional requirements around the API development process. And then you need to iterate through that development process. And ultimately, at the end of the day, an API doesn't exist in isolation. You're going to have to integrate it with heaven only knows what within your organization. Most companies that we deal with do not have the luxury of building an API in a greenfield kind of environment. They're dealing with 25 years of legacy technologies. They've got mainframes that need to figure out how they're going to make an API out of a mainframe call. So there's a lot of existing investments, there's a lot of dependencies, and there's a lot of technology that needs to be put into place. And then, after you've built it, you need to run it. You need to protect it, you need to secure it, you need to manage it. Ideally, what you need to do is split out all of the non-functional requirements in an API platform. So you're going to, as an organization that's exposing 20, 30, 40 APIs to a multi-channel kind of strategy, you're going to want to put into place an API platform. And that API platform is going to take care of all of those non-functional requirements that you see day to day. How do I secure the API? How do I monitor the API? How do I manage and provision access control? How do I provide pretty charts and flashing lights for the people and partners and developers that are actually using the API? So once you have the API built and you have it running and the lights are on, you then need to figure out how you're going to share it with everybody. How are you going to actually support your partner community? You need to publish, support, and syndicate that API as much as possible to grow your business. The whole reason you built the API in the first place was to create a new digital channel. So you're going to have to actually market that channel, market to that channel, try and get people to use that API. You need to be able to create a marketplace, whether it's internal use only, B2B, B2E, or business to developer, it doesn't matter. You're going to have a lot of different channels, and you're going to actually need to identify your customer and market and take care and support them. So you're going to have to interact and recognize your API developers. You're going to have to create some great documentation about that API and how to use it. You're going to want to make testing against that API as easy as possible. And you're going to need to figure out how to monetize that API. How are you as a business going to make money from that API, either directly or indirectly? And then last but not least, you need to analyze it. So I've gone all the way around this circle, and you've shared this API with hopefully some developers that are going to be using it or partners that are going to be using it. You need to analyze. You need to basically determine whether or not that program has been successful, find out what people like about that API, what they don't like about that API, provide business metrics back to the business to justify your own existence, and at the end of the day, drive that improvement back into the next planning stage for the next version of the API. So that's what we see in the API lifecycle. And I will tell you today that most people care about build and share and nothing else. And that's a big mistake. People don't analyze the results of their API program. They don't plan effective APIs. They don't separate out non-functional requirements. And those are things that tend to be missing when people merely react and put an API out there, or a group of developers sit down and they think, oh, I want a new API, so let me put it out there. They typically will build it, and they'll typically share it with people, but they won't do any of the other critical steps in that lifecycle. So essentially, they're collecting underpants, and they need to figure out how to make profit. So what I've done is I've sort of put together a reference architecture, and I've taken some liberties. But when you look at the plan, build, run, share, and analyze lifecycle, you can boil it down to 3 sets of capabilities. The first one is lifecycle management. The second one is the gateway. So how do you actually manage and secure and monitor and deliver that API to your B2B community or to your employees on their bring their own devices? And then the last part is the developer portal. How do you actually deliver that? How do you create a marketplace? And how do you inform your developer community about your APIs? So lifecycle management, you can think of it as, you know, the ERP system, the ERP system for your API factory. You're building APIs and you're constantly building new APIs or new versions of the API. So many people fall into the trap and say, I'm building an API, I'm only building one, and that's the end of it. But the fact of the matter is that you're continually going to be building and versioning an API over time. You're going to continually be changing that API, hopefully, based on the analytics that you've gathered, and you're going to be changing your business model over time. So one day you might be shipping DVDs by mail, and the next day you're now doing content delivery and making your own TV programs. Over time, your API is going to change your business, and your business is going to change your API or APIs. So organizations basically have 2 options, and it depends on how big they are and how seriously they take this. But essentially, you can have a complete ungoverned Wild West. If you're small, you have a small number of APIs and a well-understood and well-controlled community that's using that APIs. And you can directly define those APIs in the gateway and developer portal, and you'll probably be very successful. The second option is more governed. It's a controlled and managed process for publication, a factory, so to speak, of how do you get these APIs released into the wild. And just to clarify, let me walk down a couple of the capabilities that you need if you're going to be serious about lifecycle management. You need to be able to do approvals and workflow. You need to be able to do costing. You need to align different work streams. There's the business work stream, a product management work stream, a bunch of people writing documentation, a whole legal department that is nothing but gray hairs, and a developer community that is expecting certain things. So there's a lot of work streams that need to be aligned, probably over the period of about 6 months to build an API effectively. So when you think about that, you think about what is the actual process, what is the SDLC for building an API in a complex organization that has potentially 100 APIs. It starts becoming a problem that needs a solution. The other things that lifecycle management provides is a way to model APIs. And I know that this is sometimes an unpopular topic, but a lot of people like to model an API in a fairly structured way so that they can do change control and version management. So whether you're using Swagger or Waddle or WSDL or JSON schema, some way that you can use to actually define what that API looks like and what has changed from one version to another and what the effect of that change might be. Then all of the best practices and templates to make everyone's life easier, and encapsulating processes for versioning and change management. These are things that customers ask us all the time. How do I version an API? Well, you know, there's a couple of different ways, and the best way is this, that, the next thing. But after they've figured out the way to version the API for that business, how do they make everybody do it? If they don't make people do it in a structured and clear way, then everyone's going to do their own thing. And then last but not least, impact analysis. If you have a lot of legacy back-end systems and you have a huge B2B channel with a lot of customers, if something changes, something's going to break, and you're going to end up with a lot of really annoyed customers. Anytime now. So then there's the gateway. And the gateway, there's basically 2 models again. The first one is a proxy. So you're routing all of your API calls. You've got some back-end middleware. You've got your Node.js server hosting your API or your mainframe hosting your API, whatever you might have. And then what you're trying to do is you're trying to offload all of your non-functional requirements, your security, your monitoring. And you've built out this gateway. And there's essentially 2 different flavors of this gateway. There's a simple proxy, or there is something more complicated or more feature-rich, which supports reusable, scalable API development. And that has a lot of gateway-specific capabilities that I'll mention in the next slide, but it's also available in different footprints, like an appliance. There's vendors like ours and others that will actually sell you an appliance that can be your API gateway within your organization and handle a lot of things like process composition and orchestration, gives you improved time to market. Security, including OAuth, to enable new channels. Attack prevention, so you can protect from your JavaScript injection into JSON post requests, as an example. Caching and paging to support a mobile strategy. Quality of service management to throttle the throughput from badly behaving apps or partners that want to take you for a ride. There's a number of different capabilities that exist within a more complex kind of, or a more feature-rich gateway product like the ones that we and other vendors provide. So you need to sit down and think, are you going to put together a gateway at all? Are you going to build a proxy that provides these capabilities? Or are you going to get or develop a gateway that can help you build out some of these capabilities that I mentioned? How are you going to do orchestration, for example? How are you going to execute scripts? How are you going to deliver OAuth? You can either always build it yourself or you can get it from a vendor. Then there's the developer portal, and again, 3 models, or this time 3 models. You can build your own from scratch. Everybody likes to build everything themselves. It's time-consuming, and there's a lack of integration with something like a gateway. So let's assume you already have a gateway product, an API gateway product. If you build your own portal, you're going to have to figure out how to integrate with that gateway. You're going to have to figure out how to manage the scopes within OAuth and how those map to APIs and inform the gateway how to do its OAuth with a product that you've built internally. You can then go out and brand a vendor product like ours. It gives you the fastest time to market. It's well integrated, of course, with a gateway, but it is inherently less flexible. I mean, you're branding a product that it comes out of the box. It's like Salesforce. You're going and you're getting this product, and there's a limited sort of set of things that you can do. Then you can embed and integrate. So you could pick up a product like ours, which has an API, and it has a set of embeddable widgets. It has a JavaScript MVC framework that you can use to embed little widgets into your website. And that can kind of give you a balanced approach between building something your own from scratch and branding a vendor product. Something in the middle that will still integrate with the gateway, but give you the flexibility to do what you need to do. And it's sort of up to you. If you take a vendor product and brand it, it'll give you the fastest time to market. And you might start there. And then over time, as your own ideas mature around how you're going to bring APIs to market, you might ultimately end up with a third option, or working with someone like us to help you build something better for your business. So the kinds of things that typically emerge in a developer portal: you have a self-service community. You're trying to lower your support costs, so you need to give people a way to help themselves, your knowledge bases, forums, etc. You have documentation. They might be interactive or not, but you're trying to get developers to actually test their API, to try out your API, and you're trying to increase the adoption of your API and the apps that are leveraging the API. You then want to manage app provisioning, so how do people sign up and get an API key? How do they then use that key? How do you control and apply policies to that transaction? And how do you manage the life cycle of the various apps and the certification of various apps that are using your APIs? Integrated testing, you need to provide them with some kind of console where developers can come and test the API and learn about your API. And last but not least, analytics, providing feedback, seeing what developers like, what they don't like, what your partners like, what they don't like, what they're using, what's successful, what causes the most hassle, so on and so forth. So that gives you kind of the 3 components to a very, very high-level architecture for API management. Selfishly, we have 3 products in the space. We have a Lifecycle Manager product, which manages plan and build for APIs. We ship a gateway, and we have a Community Manager product that acts as a developer portal for our customers. There's a lot of features and capabilities in each of these, and I don't want to take up all your time, but the Lifecycle Manager is an industry-leading SDLC governance platform. It integrates with IDEs, source control management solutions, app stores within enterprises. It integrates with a lot of different source control management tools, and it allows organizations essentially to model how they want to build APIs and how they're going to promote APIs through the lifecycle. Not only that, but how does something like an API intersect with their overall SDLC process? And if something changes on the back end, how is that going to affect the APIs and the customers that are using those APIs? Then there's a gateway, a high-performance, policy-driven system that provides orchestration and scripting. It also gives you a lot of security capabilities, OAuth, SAML, OpenID, WS security, provides you with quality of service, bandwidth limiting, throttling, etc., as well as protection. So denial of service, antivirus, SQL injection, JavaScript injection, all of the kinds of protection an organization needs when they're exposing an API potentially for the first time as a new channel for their business. Then there's our Community Manager product, which is a customizable developer portal. You can go from turnkey, in other words, you just slap a style sheet on it, or you can completely customize and create a completely embedded kind of system using our API or our JavaScript widgets. It has integrated documentation, app provisioning and monitoring. We have a dev console, gives you testing, license management, partner and group management, analytics, forums, trouble ticket management, etc. You kind of get the idea. It's also delivered both as a service or on-premise or in a hybrid model. Some people like to terminate their own traffic. Some people like to do everything on-premise. Some people love the as-a-service model. The nice thing about the as-a-service model is that we're completely PCI compliant, which is painful, and we've done all that work for you. So if you leverage our platform as a service model, you're reassured that it's secure, it's well managed, it's a mature infrastructure, a mature global cloud-based infrastructure. And if you take those same products on-premise, you're pretty reassured that you could get PCI compliance yourself if that is important to you. So there we go. Thank you very much. I'm Alistair Farquharson. I'm the CTO of SOA Software, and you can reach us there and there. Thank you.